He was silenced for 60 years, branded a conspiracy theorist, buried by history. But when a mysterious letter arrives, warning that the Cold War's deadliest secret project Red Phoenix is active again, retired communications officer David Williams is forced out of hiding. What begins as a whisper from the past explodes into a global revelation as he and his long-lost ally Maggie race to expose a false flag operation that could trigger World War III. In a world addicted to lies, one man's truth might be the only thing standing between peace and nuclear annihilation. A forgotten survivor, a government deception, and a final broadcast that shook the world. This is the true story they tried to erase, and it almost cost us everything. Now, let's get to the story. They shoved me back from the console. "Stay out of this, Williams," barked Commander Harland, his polished boots planting a line of finality across the polished deck of the NORAD operations room. Behind him, red phones blinked. Static hissed from the command radio. Sweat pooled at the collar of his uniform. He wasn't sweating because of me. He was sweating because Cuba had just gone dark. Not power outage dark. Not tropical storm dark. I mean black hole dark. Every radar echo from the island had vanished in a single silent breath. And behind Harland stood Secretary Brenner, tall, pristine with his pearl gray suit and a manila folder tucked under his arm like it contained the very fate of the world. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He just whispered something into the commander's ear and gave me a look that still stabs my dreams cold, hollow, victorious. I was just a technician. I wasn't supposed to speak. But that night, silence felt like treason. I'm David Williams. In 1962, I was a 23-year-old communications officer stationed at Cheyenne Mountain, just another cog in America's great defense wheel. Back then, I believed in the system. I trusted our leaders. I thought things like decency and restraint guided the men in power. I'd grown up in a red brick house in Wisconsin, the kind with flagpoles and lemonade stands. But that all changed the night we almost nuked the world. It started small. A glitch, maybe. A radar pulse that bounced back with too much heat. The system called it an echo delta anomaly. Harmless until it wasn't. I remember the first blip. 1 dot on the screen. Then 3. Then a spread tight formation high altitude rising from the Caribbean. Unconfirmed launch trajectories. And before we could confirm anything, the defense condition moved from level 3 to level 2. DEFCON 2, one step from nuclear war. Harlan's voice cracked like thunder across the room. Secure the blast doors. Lock all data feeds. No transmissions leave this room. But I wasn't thinking about orders. I was thinking about my father, a farmer, a quiet man. Once told me, David, never fear the man with the gun. Fear the man who pulls the trigger while smiling. That night, Brenner smiled. Brenner wasn't military. He wasn't even elected. He was one of those men who float through governments like oil on water unaccountable, unreachable. They said he'd been at Bay of Pigs. Said he'd walked the beaches before the bullets were dry. And now, here he was, whispering orders, overruling generals, reading from a file marked Red Phoenix. I saw it by accident. He'd left it open on the table while speaking to Harland. A single phrase on the first page caught my eye. Simulated strike protocol authorized to trigger Soviet retaliation and justify full deployment. Simulated. My gut twisted. I leaned closer to the console. Tapped into the data feed. What I found wasn't a Cuban launch. It wasn't even a Soviet warhead. It was a spoofed signal bounced off weather balloons and spliced into our system like a magician's sleight of hand. We were being played, and someone wanted war. I confronted Harland. I told him what I'd seen. The spoof signatures, the strange timing, the inconsistencies in Soviet radio chatter. He stared at me like I'd grown horns. "Williams, are you accusing the Department of Defense of staging a nuclear strike?" I swallowed hard. "I'm saying it doesn't add up, sir." Brenner's eyes flicked toward me, expression unreadable. "What would you do, son?" he asked, like he was teaching a classroom of children. "Let them strike first." "No, sir," I said. "I'd make damn sure we weren't the ones pulling the trigger based on a lie." He nodded as if satisfied with my answer, and then ordered my removal from the room. I didn't go quietly. That's when the real war began inside. I was escorted to the lower barracks, stripped of clearance. My console access was disabled. But I wasn't done. Not by a damn mile. I had one friend left on the inside, Maggie Torres, an encryption tech, with sharper instincts than any man in uniform. I reached her through a back channel we used to prank the officers. This time, it wasn't a joke. She didn't say much, just 5 words. "You're not crazy, it's real." She sent me the file. Partial, corrupted, but enough. Enough to know that our systems had been manipulated. That a handful of men like Brenner believed the only way to beat communism was to trigger its fall. Even if it meant global extinction. It wasn't defense. It was provocation. I tried to leak the files. No one listened. Newspapers ignored it. One editor told me, "You think you're the only guy with a conspiracy theory this week." They called me a lunatic, a traitor, a scared boy chasing shadows. But I kept pushing, until someone pushed back. I woke up one morning and found my clearance permanently revoked. My record reclassified. Maggie disappeared. Her desk was cleared, her name erased. I heard rumors she'd been transferred overseas. Others whispered she was dead. That was the day I stopped being a soldier and became a witness. I left Colorado, moved to a small cabin in Wyoming, lived off the grid. For years, I said nothing. But silence is a slow poison, and secrets they rot your soul. 60 years have passed. The world has moved on. But I haven't. I've seen the classified archives now declassified. I've watched documentaries that pretend they know what happened. But none of them tell the real story. None of them say how close we came, not to a misunderstanding, but to a deliberate war. They almost did it. They almost tricked America into launching a first strike. And no one was held accountable. So why now? Why break the silence? Because 2 weeks ago I received a letter. No return address, just a single sheet inside. One sentence. Red Phoenix was not shut down. I burned the letter, but I remember every word. Now I know what we lived through once could happen again. This time I won't be silent. The Wyoming wind can cut like a blade in October, but that night it was quiet, almost reverent. I sat on my porch, an old man in a frayed coat, the envelope still trembling in my hands. No return address, no signature, just that sentence. Red Phoenix was not shut down. It hit me like a bullet. Not because I didn't believe it. I did. Hell, I always believed it was still alive somewhere buried beneath layers of bureaucratic ash and classified dust. But knowing someone else believed it too. Someone out there who had access to me, who knew my history, my silence, my shame. It meant 2 things. 1, I was being watched. 2, someone wanted me to speak. And maybe I finally would. I'd spent decades running from the memory of that night, the blinking consoles, Brenner's icy stare, Maggie's final message. But the past doesn't stay buried, not when it was never a ghost. It's a shadow, and shadows follow you even into the grave. That same night, I unlocked a steel footlocker beneath my bed, one I hadn't opened since '65. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and a decade's worth of paranoia, were fragments of everything I managed to save, scorched hard copies of communications logs, redacted memos with just enough left to haunt you, and one worn, faded photograph. Maggie, dark hair tied up in a quick bun, glasses hanging loose on her nose. That smile, half defiance, half fear. It was the last picture I took of her weeks before she vanished. "Where did they send you, Maggie?" I whispered into the dark. That question wouldn't let me sleep. So the next morning I did something I swore I never would. I drove into town. Sheridan was still small, still suspicious of outsiders. But I wasn't an outsider. Not here. Just a quiet man with a truck older than most of the kids in the gas station. I parked 2 blocks from the library and walked the rest of the way. There, I logged on to one of their ancient public computers. I didn't search for Red Phoenix. Too obvious. Too loud. I searched for Maggie Torres. Dead end. Then I tried an encrypted email, a throwback from my NORAD days, built into a long-abandoned secure server. I wasn't sure if it still worked, but I sent it anyway. "If you're out there, I got your message. It's time. They're watching me. We need to finish what we started." I signed it with our old code phrase. Whiskey, Echo 61. 3 days passed. Nothing. On the 4th morning, my internet connection disappeared. Not just a slow signal gone. My landline crackled with static. When I went to start the truck, the battery had been gutted. It wasn't a theft. It was a message. Someone had gotten my email, but it wasn't Maggie. That night I saw the drone, just a flicker above the tree line, humming like a mosquito with a secret. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it toward the sky, and flashed 3 times. It disappeared. I didn't sleep, and the next morning, a second letter arrived. This time, it came folded inside the local newspaper, tucked into page 9 like a cancer hiding inside the sports section. It had a new message. "You were right in '62. You're right now. They're still running simulations. Cuba was only the first test." No signature, but at the bottom, a printed line from an old Russian proverb. "When the bear sleeps, do not poke the sky." I felt my blood go cold. You see, the Cold War didn't end, it just changed costumes. Back then, it was Soviets and missiles. Today, it's cyber warfare, psyops, global destabilization. But the playbook, the real one, still the same. Create fear, fake a threat, push the enemy to react, justify your war. And Red Phoenix, it wasn't about defense. It was a doctrine, a trigger, a plan to simulate enemy aggression so precisely, so convincingly, that no one would dare question retaliation. It was the ultimate false flag, an invisible match to light a very real fuse. And according to whoever sent me those letters, it was still active. That night I pulled out my last card, a name I hadn't spoken in 40 years. Jack Calhoun, former CIA operative. My old handler. A man who vanished after Vietnam and was whispered to be deep inside the programs no one talked about. If anyone knew what was still alive, it was him. I drove west toward Montana, where Jack had once hidden under the alias Morris. Used to run a ranch front for off-the-books interrogations if the rumors were true. The roads were long. My bones ached with every mile. But my mind raced. What if Brenner was still alive? What if what if Red Phoenix wasn't a relic, but a plan waiting for the right moment? I arrived at the edge of Jack's old land near midnight. Everything was overgrown. The barn half collapsed, but the house had a single light on, a flicker behind stained curtains. I stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching frost-bitten grass. The silence was thick humming with memory and menace. I knocked once, then again. Finally, the door creaked open, and there he stood. Not the man I remembered, broad-shouldered, cocksure, full of black coffee and sharper lies. This man was frail, beard like salt and ash, eyes yellowed with age but sharp as flint. He stared for a long moment. "David Williams," he rasped. "I hoped you were dead." I didn't smile. "Same." He stepped aside. "You bring the storm with you." I walked in. It never left me. He poured 2 drinks. No questions, no small talk, just silence. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "You're here about Red Phoenix." I nodded. His hands trembled slightly as he handed me the glass. "They're running it again," he whispered. "But this time it's not Cuba. You should have stayed buried, Williams." That's the first thing Jack Calhoun said after the second glass of whiskey. His voice was husky, soaked with gravel and regret. He didn't flinch when he said it, didn't blink, just stared through me like I was a ghost dragging a coffin into his living room. "I did stay buried," I replied, "but someone's digging up old corpses. And this time they're planning a funeral for the whole damn planet." He exhaled slowly. "You sure they sent you the letter?" I pulled it from my jacket, unfolded it, placed it between us on the table like a loaded pistol. His eyes traced every word. His hand trembled slightly when he touched it. Then he said it. "They've moved the site." That sentence fell like a thunderclap. "The site?" I asked, voice quiet. "Simulation theater," he clarified. The old Cuba drills were just proof of concept. Now they're running urban decay scenarios, using unrest, economic panic, civilian disruption, fabricating an uprising. I leaned in. "Where?" Jack didn't answer at first. He stood up, walked toward a safe embedded in the wall behind a faded portrait of Eisenhower. He twisted the dial, clicked it open, and pulled out a folder. It was red, thicker than mine, sealed with a strip of ancient wax paper stamped C.O. Brazos 7. He tossed it onto the table. "St. Louis." I laughed, but it came out hollow. St. Louis. What the hell is in St. Louis? Everything he said, lighting a cigarette with a cracked Zippo. Discontent. Economic rot. A fractured police force. Old Cold War tunnels under the river. Perfect place to fabricate chaos and pin it on someone foreign. Hell, they've already got the players on the board. I flipped through the file. There were photos, grainy surveillance maps, intercepted radio transcripts. My stomach churned as I read phrases like Operation Sulfur Incite Panic through false broadcast and Stage 3 Collapse of Confidence in Federal Response. This wasn't a simulation. This was a script, and they were preparing to act. Jack leaned forward, tapping the folder. "You want to know the worst part, Dave. This version of Red Phoenix doesn't just simulate war. It incentivizes it, makes conflict profitable, weaponizes fear through media economics, AI-driven misinformation. It's Cold War 2.0 with better graphics. And who's running it? I asked. He sighed. The same people who never got caught. Brenner's protégés. Career consultants. Silicon Valley types with intelligence ties. Think tanks pretending to be charities. They're not on any payrolls you'd recognize. They're ghosts with gold cards. I stared at him. "You've known this," and said nothing. Jack met my gaze. You think I haven't tried? Every time I spoke out, someone disappeared. Every time I mailed something, it got lost. We're not fighting an army, Dave. We're fighting an algorithm, a system, one that's smarter than we ever were. I felt the old rage stirring in my bones, not the kind that burns, the kind that freezes. Sharp, cold, clear. This can't keep happening, I said. We have to expose it. Jack barked a bitter laugh. And who's gonna listen? Some geriatric whistleblower with a bunker full of files. The world doesn't care about heroes anymore. Dave, it cares about clickbait and dopamine. Then we give them both, I said. He stopped laughing. We spent the next 5 hours scanning documents, converting them to encrypted drives. Jack still had a signal jammer in his basement, and his system was dark. No Wi-Fi. No trace. We found references to something called Phase Zero Domestic Pressure Vessel. From what I could decode, it was a live event, not just a drill. A false flag scenario involving emergency broadcast hacks planted evidence of foreign involvement and pre-signed retaliatory orders. Jack closed the file and whispered, "They're trying to finish what they started in '62. This time it's not about missiles, it's about chaos. If the people panic, the government retaliates. Chain reaction. No one questions the blast if they're blinded by the fire." I barely slept that night. The next morning, Jack drove us into Bozeman, where a retired NSA tech named Lily Tran ran an underground encryption ring. Lily had once decrypted Soviet chatter during the Berlin crisis. Now she monitored dark web channels for the highest bidder, or in our case, for free. She stared at the data for 20 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. Someone's using a broadcast node in Kansas City to simulate signals from hostile groups, she said. It's piggybacking off FEMA protocols. Jack and I looked at each other. St. Louis is a smokescreen, I said slowly. They want attention there. But the real trigger is Kansas City Lily finished. We didn't have time to go through channels. This wasn't the era of trusted journalists and moral leaders. It was the era of leaks. I made the decision that would mark me forever. We'd go public. Jack hesitated, but finally nodded. We'll drop the files online. Dark web first. Then signal boost it with influencers. Doesn't matter if people think it's fake, as long as it spreads. And just as we were preparing the upload, boom, a sound outside shattered the moment. We rushed to the door. Jack's truck was in flames. I pulled him back as a second explosion tore through the porch. We hit the ground, glass raining over us. Gunshots followed. Silencers. Professional. I saw a shadow move through the smoke, tall, masked, precise. "Go," Jack roared. "Back door, go now." I grabbed the drive, shoved it into my jacket, and sprinted through the kitchen. Jack stayed behind. I heard 2 shots, then silence. By the time I reached the tree line, the house was fully ablaze, and Jack was gone. I drove all night in a stolen car. Back roads, no headlights, just me and the fire inside. Red Phoenix wasn't a relic. It was a weapon, still loaded, still aimed. And now they'd killed the only man who could prove it. But they made one mistake. They let me live. They thought blowing up that house would silence the past. But they forgot one thing. Some ghosts don't die. They broadcast. I spent the next 36 hours zigzagging through mountain passes, ditching every trace of who I was. Burned the jacket, swapped license plates, changed gas stations every stop. No credit cards, no phones. Just me, a flash drive of truth, and the sound of Jack Calhoun's last words echoing through my skull. They're not launching missiles this time, David. their launching belief. I ended up in Denver, holed up in a broken-down motel with no front desk clerk and wallpaper that peeled like old scabs. I plugged the drive into a burner laptop I'd pulled from a dead drop Jack had kept in a rail yard locker. Inside, the files were more than just evidence. They were instructions, blueprints for the new Red Phoenix operation, timelines, target cities, AI scripts designed to simulate foreign interference in news cycles, deepfake videos prepped to show mobs storming federal buildings, none of it real. All of it designed to provoke mass hysteria and push the country into retaliatory lockdown. And the worst part, the date. Phase 0 wasn't in development. It was set to launch in 4 days. I couldn't go to the press. That much was clear. I'd tried before. Even in the 60s, whistleblowing was like screaming into a hurricane. Today, it's worse. Every media outlet has a side. Every platform has a bias. And in the digital noise, truth dies quietly. So I aimed for the only place that still listened to shock the people. But to reach them, I had to reach her. Maggie. I didn't know if she was alive. I didn't even know if she was real anymore. Memory has a way of polishing ghosts until they shine too brightly. But I remembered one thing: the last safe house we'd built together during the Cuban fallout scare. Back then we called it the Quiet Room, a literal hole in the wall of a condemned records facility beneath the ruins of an old train station in Omaha. I drove through the night. I don't remember the miles, just the cold silence of a world on the brink, and the weight of everything I'd seen pressing into my ribs. When I arrived, the building was gone, demolished, flattened, but the wall remained. There, behind loose bricks stained by decades of rust and rain, I found it. An old steel panel with a punch code lock. My fingers hesitated. The last time I touched this, I was a young man with hope. This time, I was an old man with vengeance. I typed in the code 1121, Maggie's birthday. Click. The door opened, and inside sat a box wrapped in weatherproof canvas. I opened it. Inside were 2 things: a reel-to-reel tape marked Project Echo and a folded piece of paper. Maggie's handwriting. If you're reading this, they failed to kill you. I'm not dead, David. I'm waiting. You know where. I did. Back in '62, Maggie and I had made a pact. If things ever went too far, if Red Phoenix ever activated again, we'd rendezvous at an abandoned ranger station in Idaho's Bitterroot Range. No signals, no trails, just trees, cliffs, and radio silence. It was the only place I ever felt safe, and it was time to go back. I hiked in on foot. No GPS. Just memory and the compass sewn into my old military belt. It took 2 days. On the second night, as I approached the clearing, I saw the light. Faint. Flickering. A lantern behind frosted glass. My heart pounded like it hadn't in decades. I opened the door, and there she was, Maggie Torres. A little older. Hair streaked with silver now. Glasses gone. Her eyes sharp as ever. She didn't speak. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. And for the first time in 60 years, I let myself fall into the arms of someone who knew not the story the world heard, but the silence we carried. We sat by the fire that night, trading wounds and wisdom. She'd escaped after her transfer, faked her death in an intel fire in Tunisia, slipped into digital silence, watching the Red Phoenix protocols grow in the shadows. She'd been waiting for a sign that someone remembered, that someone still had fight. I sent the letter, she finally said. I wasn't sure you'd respond. I almost didn't, I whispered, but Jack. She closed her eyes. I know. We reviewed the files together. She brought more. Evidence gathered over decades, shell corporations funding shell wars, defense contractors inflating rogue threats, fake extremist groups engineered by marketing firms and sold to governments as real. They weren't just faking attacks, they were faking enemies. The plan was simple, horrifyingly simple. In 4 days, Phase 0 would launch a live event in Kansas City. Simulated explosions in a federal building. Doctored footage showing armed foreign nationals. Social media witnesses seated in advance. Panic would spread. Emergency powers activated. Retaliation justified. One country would be blamed, but it wouldn't stop there. The cycle would begin again. More fear, more war, more control. Unless we stopped it. Maggie pulled out a radio. Old school, shortwave, analog. We broadcast the truth she said. Intercept their signal. Leak the real footage. Let the world see the fakery in real time. You think people will believe it? I asked. She smiled. Enough people will doubt. And that's all we need. Doubt stops war. I looked at her. You ready to become public enemy number 1? She grinned. I always was. We hiked up the ridge the next morning. Built a makeshift tower. Maggie tweaked the frequency while I patched the drive into an encoder. We had one shot. One narrow window during the live event when the broadcast would bounce. The world would be watching the lie. We just had to show them the truth. As the sun set, Maggie turned to me. If we die tonight, she said, we die louder than we ever lived. I nodded. Not in fear, but in fire. I've seen war. Not the kind that rips flesh and burns cities, though I've seen that too. I mean the kind that moves silently like smoke. The kind that starts with words, slithers into fear, and ends with people tearing each other apart, while the architects sit back and count the profit. And on that night high in the Bitterroot Mountains, I saw that war coming again. This time it wasn't missiles, it was perception. Maggie's fingers moved across the analog dials like a concert pianist, coaxing life from an old symphony. The tower we'd rigged, built from spare radio poles, solar packs, and sheer defiance, stood swaying against the Idaho wind, ready to scream a truth louder than any lie. Frequency is clear, she whispered. We're in position. We've got 63 minutes before the Kansas City event starts. I nodded. And after that, she met my eyes. After that, we either become the people who saved the world, or the names on a disinformation watch list buried in some unmarked grave. I smiled. Fitting. We ran tests. Checked the timestamp on our intercept. The Project Echo footage Jack and I had recovered was pre-coded time-stamped to match the event to the second. We knew their script. We knew the order. Boom, number 1, 1702, CST, Federal Building Parking Structure. Boom, number 2, 1705, CST, False Flag Explosion in City Square. Boom, number 3, 1708, CST, live broadcast of militants storming Municipal Control Hub deepfake. It would play like a horror film, like 9/11 without the planes. People wouldn't know it was fake, but they would react like it was real. And that was the point. At 4:50 p.m. Central, Maggie switched the radio frequency. This is it, she said. They'll start uploading decoy signals through the federal comm lines any second now. My hands shook as I held the trigger switch. The whole world wouldn't hear us, but the right people might. I stared at the screen. Upload channel A live intercept. 76%. Then it began. I watched the feed on our decrypted monitor. Kansas City looked normal, traffic lights, pigeons, street musicians. But then the signal shifted. A camera blinked. A surge of static buzzed across our screen, and suddenly, boom, The first explosion rocked the federal building's parking garage. Dust filled the frame. Screams, sirens, every inch choreographed like a Broadway disaster. "This is it," Maggie said. Boom. The second blast echoed in the square. Chaos bloomed like a sickness. Then came the deepfake, a video of masked militants storming the control hub. Weapons drawn. Foreign dialects dubbed in. It looked real. Hell, I felt it in my chest. And just then, Maggie hit the switch. Our broadcast overrode the static. We pushed out a simultaneous stream, their fake footage side by side with the original raw feed. No sound, just cold, brutal comparison. People watching the official feed saw terror. But those watching us, they saw truth. No explosion, no attackers, just smoke bombs, stage lighting, green screen glitches. We'd hacked their moment, turned their horror show into a blooper reel from hell. But we weren't alone. As soon as the first wave of our signal broke through, their jammers responded. Maggie's laptop blinked red. They've located our frequency. We've got 5 minutes, maybe less. I uploaded the files to 3 backup nodes. "Get ready to move," I said. "They'll be coming." She nodded. "We need at least 2 minutes of clear air to replicate." A bar on the screen crawled slowly toward 100%. We were so close, too close. And then, the sound of rotor blades, low, heavy, getting closer. I grabbed the drive. Maggie slammed her laptop shut. "We go on foot, down the ridge." "No time," I growled. "We split. You take the hard copy. I'll keep the decoy." She didn't argue, didn't cry, just handed me a flash drive and ran. The sound of her footsteps vanishing into the trees will haunt me until I die. They came in black. No insignias, no warnings. Just cold helmets and tactical gear and rifles with silencers. They surrounded the tower as I stood beside the still sputtering transmitter. One of them stepped forward. "You, David Williams." The voice was synthetic filtered. I smiled. "Depends. You here to kill me or thank me?" He didn't answer, just reached for the drive in my hand. The decoy drive. I dropped it in the snow at his boots. And then I said something I hadn't said in decades. Red Phoenix was a lie, and now the world knows. He raised his rifle. I closed my eyes. But the shot never came. Instead, the sound of a second transmission pierced the air. A new signal. Maggie's voice. Broadcasting across every emergency frequency. Calm, measured, unapologetic. To those watching this broadcast, the explosions you saw were fake. The footage manipulated. We have uploaded the real files to over 200 independent servers. This was a false flag operation, part of a covert simulation known as Red Phoenix. You are being used. Do not give in to fear. Question everything. The soldier hesitated. His radio cracked. Garbled commands. Chaos. Then he turned and walked away. I collapsed in the snow, heart pounding, tears freezing on my face. We'd done it. We'd cut through the noise. Across the country, chaos turned to confusion, and confusion gave way to doubt. It didn't stop the machine completely, but it jammed it just long enough. Protests erupted. Investigations began. A congressional subcommittee was formed. The president went on television the next day, grim-faced and tired-eyed, denying everything. But the people weren't listening to him anymore. They were listening to us. I stayed off-grid for weeks. So did Maggie. But the damage had been done. Red Phoenix had been pulled into the light. And the light has a way of burning monsters. There's a silence after exposure. Not the calm of victory, no. Something heavier. It's the silence when the curtain falls, and you realize the monsters weren't just actors. They were real. They were in the audience. They were directing the play. And now, with Red Phoenix unmasked, those monsters weren't running. They were hunting. I spent the first week after the broadcast moving nightly, never staying longer than a meal's worth of time. Maggie and I had scattered like dust radio-silent coordinates, rotating on an old cipher system we'd invented decades earlier. Something even quantum decryption couldn't break. But despite our caution, we were bleeding into the world again. People were asking questions. The files we released weren't conspiracy rants. They were surgical truths, time-stamped communications between private defense firms, forged security clearance docs, video footage of green screen explosions rehearsed months in advance. Red Phoenix wasn't theory anymore. It was fact, and that terrified them. The first to fall was a senator low-level vocal hawk caught funneling funds into a shell NGO that had connections to Phase Zero contractors. He held a press conference, collapsed mid-speech. Heart attack, they said, but his assistant went missing that night. And 3 whistleblowers connected to the internal comms we'd exposed. All gone. 1 car accident, 1 suicide, 1 simply vanished. They were striking back, quietly, efficiently, and the public, split in 2. Some believed us, marched for us, cried our names like we were martyrs. Others said we were terrorists, Russian plants, deep state operatives in reverse. It didn't matter. The truth was no longer theirs to control. And for the first time since 1962, I felt like we might actually win. Maggie sent a message through one of our dead drops in Missoula. They're calling for a hearing, a real one. Senate, prime time. The files are in. I didn't breathe for a whole minute. A hearing, on live television. They couldn't bury that. They couldn't shoot their way out of that. The next day, a man showed up at my safe house door. Mid-40s. Military stance. Civvies, but too clean. Eyes like flint. He said nothing. Just handed me an envelope. Inside a plane ticket one way. D.C. An access badge. A note. It's time. The world's listening. I flew out under a name that hadn't existed since the Nixon years. At Reagan National, a black SUV pulled up beside me before I even hit the sidewalk. 2 suits, no names, but they didn't cuff me, didn't threaten. One of them simply said, "We need you to speak clearly." For the record, the hearing room was cold. Colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in tone. Packed with faces, cameras, reporters, senators with practiced outrage and consultants with buried secrets. And across from me, a man I hadn't seen in over 6 decades. Brenner, older, white-haired, eyes untouched by time. Somehow still powerful, still arrogant. I froze. Maggie hadn't warned me he'd be there, and yet of course he was. Because this wasn't just about Red Phoenix anymore. This was his redemption tour. They called me first. I walked to the stand, sat down. My hand trembled slightly as I swore the oath. The lights were hot, the air stiff. Then the chair of the subcommittee leaned forward. "Mr. Williams, please tell the American people what you witnessed." And so I did. I told them about Cheyenne Mountain, about the spoofed signals, about Maggie's disappearance, Jack's death, the Kansas City operation, the files, the lies, the truth. Every word a match on dry leaves. By the end, the room was silent, until Brenner stood. Uninvited, he spoke slowly, calculated. "Mr. Williams has painted a compelling story. But I remind you, stories are not facts." He smiled. "This man is not a hero. He is a relic, chasing ghosts." And that's when Maggie appeared, from the side doors, wearing her old clearance badge, eyes fierce, a USB drive in her hand. She stepped forward, handed it to the clerk. "This isn't a story," she said. It's a broadcast schedule. Click. A monitor lit up. Footage played. Internal memos. Contractors joking about fake smoke budgets. Deep fakes in progress. Real-time testing in war rooms. And finally, Brenner, standing in a boardroom saying, "Red Phoenix doesn't require consent, only fear." The room exploded. Chairs were knocked over. A senator shouted for arrest. Reporters surged forward. Brenner tried to speak, but the crowd drowned him out. Cameras zoomed in as his badge was revoked, the symbol of power. His clipboard, his command was taken from his hands. He was escorted out. No one stood with him. And us, we stood taller, not as heroes, but as survivors. That night, Maggie and I sat on the steps of the Capitol. We didn't say much, just watched the sunrise over a city that had come so close to burning itself for the sake of control. But not today. Today we'd bought time, not peace, but possibility. I once believed that silence was survival, that, keeping my head down, staying in the shadows, walking away from fire and into the dark, that was how you lived through things like Red Phoenix. But I was wrong. Silence doesn't save you. It buries you. And on that morning, after the hearing, after Brenner's walk of shame, after the floodgates of truth burst open, I stood under the dome of the Capitol and realized something I had run from for 60 years. It was never about the bomb. It was about the lie. The aftermath came fast. Investigations, firings, a full-scale sweep through contractor firms, classified divisions, and back-channel agencies that had built entire empires on manipulating fear. They tried to scrub the data, discredit us, launch counter-narratives. But the people had seen too much. The footage had been downloaded, duplicated, translated. The files were stored on blockchain, mirrored across hundreds of independent servers beyond government erasure. The truth was no longer ours. It was everyone's. 2 weeks after the hearing, the president addressed the nation. He didn't deny Red Phoenix. He couldn't. He promised reform, promised transparency, promised a new era of accountability. We knew better than to believe every word. But still, it was a beginning. Maggie and I were offered security detail book deals, even documentary contracts. We turned them all down. We weren't looking to be famous. We were looking to disappear on our own terms this time. We settled in a quiet place. Mountains again. Different ridge. Different view. The kind of place where the only signals are wind through trees and birdsong. I built a shortwave tower out back, not for broadcasting, for remembering. One morning, Maggie found me tuning the dials, eyes distant. "You're not going to stop, are you?" she asked. I smiled. "Do you want me to?" She looked at me for a long time, then said no. "But tell me what you're really doing." I tapped the dial, listening, because in the end they don't disappear. The Brenners of the world, the quiet architects, the smiling men behind the curtains, they just rebrand. They learn from failure. They wait for fatigue, and then they try again. So I listen, every day, for the next frequency, the next echo, the next lie dressed as safety. And I teach, local kids mostly, history, ethics, how to spot propaganda, how to think, not just consume. Maggie started a network of citizen broadcasters, a quiet web of watchers who record, archive, and preserve the truth. We don't shout anymore. We signal. Short bursts, clean frequencies, no slogans, just facts. And every now and then, letters arrive. From students, from veterans, from janitors in federal buildings, from journalists who'd almost quit. Some write, "You saved my life." Others say, "You helped me see again." But the one I treasure most came from a 14-year-old girl in Kansas City. All it said was, "I saw the broadcast." I didn't panic. I told my family to wait. We waited. We're okay. Thank you for showing us not all explosions are real. Some are just shadows cast by cowards. That's when I understood what all of this meant. It wasn't about stopping a bomb. It was about lighting a candle in the dark so others could find the fuse before it was lit. We hadn't destroyed Red Phoenix. We'd exposed it. We'd reminded the world of something it was on the verge of forgetting. Truth is fragile, but if you carry it even trembling, it burns brighter than fear. So here's what I'll say to you, whoever you are, wherever you're reading this. If you live in a place where laws are written behind glass walls, if you feel like a nobody being watched by somebodies, if you've been told that your voice doesn't matter, then know this. Write it down, record it, whisper it into the static. Because sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a gun or a vote. It's the signal that refuses to die. The world didn't end in 1962, and it didn't end this year, but it almost did, twice, and I was there both times. The first time I stayed silent, the second time I spoke, and I will never stop speaking again. The world didn't end in a mushroom cloud. It nearly ended in silence. For decades, the truth about Red Phoenix was buried hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy, power, and fear. But when one forgotten veteran stood up and chose truth over comfort, everything changed. Not because he had weapons, not because he had power, but because he had the courage to speak. This story isn't just about nuclear threats or secret operations. It's about how close we all live to the edge without even knowing it. It reminds us that the most powerful force in the world isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's awareness, it's resistance, it's voice. Every lie survives on silence. But one voice, your voice can echo through the static and start a movement. In a world full of deception, truth is the loudest rebellion. If this story made your heart race, if it made you think, then hit that subscribe button. This channel exists to shine a light where others look away, to tell the stories they don't want you to hear. Do you believe operations like Red Phoenix still exist? What would you do if you had proof of a global lie? Let's talk about it. Let's keep the signal alive, because your comment could wake up someone else. Subscribe, share, speak. This is just one story, but it won't be the last. The truth deserves to be heard, and you are part of the broadcast.